Hi, witchy friends. It's your friend Sage here. Hope you're well. I know we're talking about mindfulness in the last lesson, and I do hope you started practicing mindfulness and will continue to practice it. But today I'm going to jump topics. I hope my jumping topics doesn't seem too jarring or disjointed to you, but rather than spending 2 months straight on meditation to get it all out, I prefer to touch on meditation in small doses. Give you some time to sort of digest it and work on one meditation practice before we move on to the next, especially if you're really new to meditation. There's just so much to learn, honestly, and while meditation is important to Wicca, in my opinion, the way I learned Wicca anyway, and the way I practice it, this is not a meditation channel, so I don't want to dominate this channel with meditation topics. I just want to give you some basic info and different types to try, and I hope you'll continue to explore that topic as you continue to practice and learn it. So meditation is something we're going to come back to time and time again. In fact, there are a lot of topics that I may introduce, give you a chance to digest for a while as we bring up something else, and then we'll go back to the first topic later, and when we're ready to give it a little bit of a deeper look, because a lot of these topics are multi-layered and they can get a little bit more complex. So I think it's best to just go over things in small bites rather than try to shove them all down your throat in one sitting. It's just too much at once. So today I want to go back to explaining Wicca basics and talking a little about philosophy. So we're going to talk about the Wiccan Rede. And what I want to do is to put the Wiccan Rede into some perspective. I've talked about this in not just Grove class, but in some articles and other videos. I get the feeling by the books and the websites and discussions that a lot of people aren't really sure what the Wiccan Rede is or its place in Wicca. It seems there's a lot of misinformation about that. First thing is, a lot of people think the Wiccan Rede is a long poem. And the simple fact is, it's not. You may have seen that long poem on Wicca websites, and some will call it the Wiccan Rede, the long version or the full version. I'm sure you've seen it. By the Wiccan Rede, you must in perfect love and perfect trust, blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on. I hope I'm not bursting any bubbles here, but that is not the Wiccan Rede. It's a poem built around the Wiccan Rede. The poem was published around 1975 in a Pagan magazine, and we don't know exactly when it was written. Lady Gwen Thompson published it, and she claims it was written by and passed down to her by her grandmother, Adriana Porter. The poem was titled The Rede of the Wicca, W-I-C-C-A-E, and the last line is the actual Wiccan Rede, only the last line. But for some reason, people now call the entire poem the Wiccan Rede. Thompson claims her grandmother practiced Wicca, and that all these beliefs and practices written about in the poem were passed down to her. And this claim would give some credence to the old religion theories, but unfortunately for Thompson, her story, it doesn't hold up. It's not very credible. Part of the problem is the language of the poem was attempting to sound old and archaic, but the language was misused. She claimed her grandmother and her witch lineage had some kind of ties back to Salem and the Salem witch trials. And we know now, like, there's not even debate about it. There was nothing like Wicca or modern witchcraft going on during the Salem witch trials, the hysteria that was going on there. And another problem is that a lot of the so-called Wiccan ways that were in the poem were products of mid-20th century Neopaganism, and there's no evidence that they really go back any earlier than that. Is it possible that this actually came from an older version of Wicca that predates Gerald Gardner? I guess anything's possible, but it's not very likely. There just isn't any evidence. And I can't say anyone knows if Thompson was lying or trying to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. It was a time when a lot of people were suspected of lying about the origins of their beliefs and practices in the pagan revival of the 20th century, including Gerald Gardner himself. Everyone seemed to want to prove they were practicing something with a much older heritage. Age somehow equaled prestige at the time, and there seemed to be real competition between certain people and certain groups trying to prove their religion or their spiritual practices were the most antiquated, going back in unbroken lines to ancient pagans and witches. And some people outright made up stuff, while others would find things that other people had made at some point, and they would just cling to it. And maybe they even believed it, but they wanted it so badly to believe that this was the real McCoy, they would just close their minds to any other possible evidence or interpretation. Maybe not even deliberately, but just out of this desire they had for it to be true, because they really wanted to feel part of some sacred ancient lineage. So it is possible Thompson had a horse in this race, and she did start her own tradition, and she could have written that poem herself and lied about her grandmother. Or it's possible that she got the poem, she found it. Maybe she was truly mistaken about its origins. But as for whether this writing was actually authentically Wiccan or authentically old, no, there's just nothing other than her claim to suggest it goes back any earlier than the 1970s. Now, does this mean you should tear the reed of the Wicca poem out of your Book of Shadows and burn it? No. If you find meaning in it, that's up to you, and that's fine. There are a lot of poems or writings or songs in general that I find spiritually inspirational, so much that in my Wiccan practices, they're equivalent to prayers. They just have become so sacred and meaningful to me. But you should know the facts. And the fact is that this is not some kind of Wiccan scripture. Neither the poem nor the reed. Not all Wiccans have lived by it. Wicca wasn't built upon this poem or anything like that. Wicca existed for decades without it. Few people outside Thompson's circle thought it was relevant after it was published, and it didn't really even get popular until the advent of the internet and a lot of websites misinforming people that it was the, quote, long version of the Rede. Even the actual Wiccan Rede needs to be put into perspective. It wasn't a thing even until the 1960s. It was a saying that kind of evolved. And I did go into this in an article tracing the sentiments back as far as possible, breaking it down. I will link to that below, but the main source of the inspiration for Wicca came from Crowley's version. Aleister Crowley founded the Lema, and one of the principal beliefs was, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Crowley, being the notorious hedonist that he was, anyone practicing any spirituality related to the occult got a lot of flack for that. Gerald Gardner was a friend of Crowley and fairly high-ranking member of Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, Order of the Oriental Templars. When Crowley died, Gardner was in it and took over for memberships and stuff. Anyone connected with Crowley in the mid-20th century took a lot of flack if they were connected to Crowley and the occult. So naturally, Gardner and Wiccans took some flack for that. The actual Wiccan Rede is only 8 words. Just 8. And they don't even rhyme. It's, and it harm none, do what you will. And it harm none, do what you will. That's it. That's the entire thing. And, by the way, is the archaic form of if. So in modern English, if it harm none, do what you will. It was first said, at least publicly, it was first said in the late 1960s by Gardner's high priestess, or former high priestess, because she had broken with Gardner's original coven by that time, but Doreen Valiente. Doreen Valiente was the first one Gardner initiated, and it was mostly her writings and poetry that helped flesh out the religion Gardner was trying to reconstruct or reinvent or invent, depending on your perspective. We'll get more into the history later and get into details then. But basically, the mainstream was accusing witchcraft and Gardner's whole movement of being evil because of its connection to Crowley and Thelema. They would hold that up as proof, and people would bring up Crowley's hedonism and his do what thou wilt rule. And Valiente she was simply responding to that kind of criticism, saying, and it harm none, do what thou wilt. Trying to show that there was a difference between Wicca and Thelema, that it had nothing to do with Crowley, that it had nothing to do with hedonism. So it was just a response. And that was it. I mean, she made the statement, it was published in a magazine, and over the next few years, people latched onto it, and it became a popular kind of sentiment. And indeed, even today, it's embraced as something important in Wicca. Somehow, the importance of it really flourished, and even started to get misrepresented. But it should be known to Wiccans today that this was not some kind of core philosophy in the beginning. It was not something that all Wicca rested on. Again, Wicca went on for decades without the Rede. And no one's saying tear it out of your Book of Shadows. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Rede. And in fact, it's certainly made itself a place in Wicca. But, you can embrace it if you want, but you should decide for yourself how much emphasis you want to put on it in your own personal spiritual philosophies. And that's up to you. As long as you also realize that other Wiccans can make the same decision for themselves. And they may play some more importance on it than you do, or less importance, and some just eschew it entirely. We don't have to agree on the importance of the Rede as a whole, because it's not like some central foundational doctrine. Some take the Wiccan Rede as a commandment, and they see it as an order, sort of, to never do harm, like a prime directive. Some people will even barrel it down to 3 words: do no harm. That is one perspective of some Wiccans. I don't personally agree with that perspective because it's an unachievable goal. Obviously, there's a lot open to interpretation. So, what is harm? What qualifies as harm? Beating up an old lady, obviously harm, and I think we'll all agree on that, but what about fighting back in self-defense if someone attacks you? How far are we taking the word harm and what it involves? How far of an extension are we gonna give the word harm? Beyond people, to animals, to the earth itself? Am I harming the environment if I use styrofoam plates ever? I mean, I don't usually, but if I do, does that mean I'm doing harm and violating the Wiccan Rede? Am I harming pests when I sprinkle my diatomaceous earth? There's this natural substance that I put in my yard, and it helps kill the ticks and the aphids, but did I do harm then? I mean, it protects me, my family, my dog, my plants, but it definitely helps kill the pests. Am I harming a carrot when I pluck it out of my garden? When I walk on the grass, am I doing harm? If I swat a mosquito? I mean, you could argue I'm harming microbes when I blow my nose, killing millions of germs. Some are harmful, some aren't, they don't deserve it, but hey, should I be held responsible for that? You can't live without doing harm in some sense, depending on how you want to define it, even if you're the most pacifist, compassionate, total vegan. I mean, you still have to do some kind of harm if you even exist. So arguing with people on the internet and saying they're dumb or like blasting them for ideas I don't agree with, is that harm? Is it harm to misjudge someone or to mischaracterize someone? Like if I say people of a political party I don't agree with I'll be acting out of ignorance or malintent. Am I harming people by that kind of generalizing and accusing them of callous attitudes? Am I harming you by telling you the truth about my feelings if it hurts your feelings? If someone is in love with me and I don't feel it and I break up with that person, is that harming them? What about the harm to myself? If I don't get enough sleep, if I eat something that's bad for me. I mean, I can't see how you can live without doing harm. Is it harmful if we're both up for a job that we both wanted and I get it and now you're unemployed? I've actually heard, and this is in real life discussions, not online, but I knew someone who said they decided they didn't want to do magic after all because they were worried they might be taking something that someone else needed. They came to the conclusion that doing magic, say to buy a car for a good price, was unethical to them because they didn't want to be the reason someone who needed it more would lose the opportunity. And I don't see how anyone could live like that, because every action we take has ripples, that ripple in the pond effect. Some good, some bad, some neutral, to varying degrees. It's going to affect others. Should I flunk a test on purpose because I might get into a school that someone else wanted to get into? And why don't I deserve it? Aren't I harming myself and my family if I give up things for other people that I don't even know? Also, the Rede doesn't mention what we should do if we are doing harm. It's an if/then statement. If it harm none, then do what you will. That's another interpretation. In this way, it's not actually saying we cannot do harm. It doesn't actually tell us what to do if we are doing harm, though. It tells us we can do things if we're not doing harm, but what if we are doing? What if harm is unavoidable in some cases? Like with, say, pest control in my home, or with hurting someone's feelings because you have to be honest. It gives us no direction there. If we're doing harm, we can't really rely on the Rede for guidance. It's just basically a live and let live sentiment. Do your thing if you're not hurting anyone. Don't let anyone guilt you or shame you or bully you. I think taking it as a commandment of sorts is a bit oversimplistic, because you're never gonna do what you will if you're forbidden from doing harm. Because harm is so debatable and can extend so far. Another word you could argue in the Rede is will. What is meant by will? In Crowley's Thelema, the will is the soul's highest purpose. It's not just what you desire, it's your reason for being on this earth. So, since the Rede was essentially a derivative of Crowley's law, if you look at it, will from that perspective, it really changes the meaning of the Rede. In that case, it's saying, as long as you're not hurting anyone, keep striving for your highest purpose. So even then, there's a nod to ethics and personal responsibility while keeping your eye on the most important goal, but it still does not go into detail on, well, what encompasses the kind of harm we're talking about. Like any harm at all, mitigated harm, or you could interpret will to mean your own desire. But does that mean every little whim, or just going after goals in general? I think we can look to doing no harm as a vague kind of ideal, but not as a realistic concrete, achievable goal in life. Certainly not a commandment or any kind of requirement of our faith. I think it can be embraced by Wiccans. You know, the Rede has certainly found a place in our faith just because so many people have embraced it. I think each of us should ponder, though, and think, what does this really mean to me? In what way would I agree? Under what circumstances might I disagree with the Rede? How far do I think I need to take the Rede? I think we don't pass it around flippantly as it has been. I don't think we should pass it off as some kind of commandment or golden rule, and I really don't think it does much service to use it to describe Wicca to others as a core doctrine. We shouldn't act like it's the basis for everything we do or believe, because it honestly, it doesn't say a whole lot, and it's just so open to interpretation, and it really just hasn't been there from the beginning. Grove students should know that we don't treat the Rede like a central theology in Wicca in the Grove. We want our students to think about it and come up with their own interpretations and live by it as they see it, but not to use it as a scripture that we beat up other Wiccans or other people in general, you know, beating them over the head with it. Do no harm, I am more Wiccan than thou, because in my opinion, I try harder to avoid harm than you do. It's just not what it was meant to be. You need to give serious thought to what you consider harm and what's ethical and where you draw the lines, and you should extend others the same courtesy, because things are not all that black and white. Personally, I think there are much better Wiccan writings that give us guidance and help us in pondering ethics and morals, and we'll get to those soon. But for now, that's the Rede, and that's what you should know about the Rede, especially as it pertains to Grove. And as per usual, you can head over to the Grove for the assignments and to start or join in any discussions on this topic. I'd like to really hear from you, either in Grove or just comment down below. What are your thoughts on the Rede? How seriously do you think it should be taken? I love hearing different interpretations and opinions on that. And while you're at it, don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you did like this video. Share it if you know someone who may be interested in it. Subscribe and ring the bell if you want to see more Grove content. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a magical day. Bye.